So in the last lesson, we started talking about blood, and we already have started going over a lot of the immune system because many of the cells of the immune system, the white blood cells, are in the blood. So some of this stuff will be kind of building on what we went over yesterday or review of what we went over in the last lesson. And then we're also going to go over some other components of the immune system. So for this lesson on the immune system, we're going to go over the difference between the innate and adaptive immune system. We're going to talk about what the barriers are that our body has to prevent infection. We're going to go into the white blood cells once again, more specifically into how they cause things like inflammation. We're also going to talk about something called complement proteins, and then we're going to go more in depth into the cells of the adaptive immune system, which include the T cells and the B cells. And then we're briefly going to touch on kind of the difference between the innate and adaptive immune system in terms of responding to a secondary infection. So the immune system is what protects us from harmful microorganisms, whether that be bacteria, viruses, or parasites, or even fungus in some cases. Pathogens are just the name for any harmful microorganism that can cause illness or disease. And the immune system's functions include identifying the pathogen, which when you're identifying the pathogen, what we mean by that is determining if a cell or something that's floating around inside of you is a pathogen or is a part of your own body. So we call that like self-determination. Can it determine if something is part of yourself or is a foreign body, essentially? The other part of the immune system function is the actual immune response. So once it identifies something as being a pathogen or being a foreign entity, then how does it go about actually fighting that infection or that pathogen off? And the immune system is broken down into two main categories, but both categories need to be able to do both of these functions. The two categories are the innate immunity and the adaptive immunity. Innate immunity is the part of the immune system that you're born with. It's also called the non-specific part of your immune system because it responds to every single pathogen the same way. It just has like a constant immediate response to any foreign body that it detects. The innate immune system includes your barriers, which just try and prevent pathogens from getting into your body in the first place. It also includes the non-specific cellular responses, where certain white blood cells help to fight infections. And then it also includes the complement proteins. The innate immune system is sometimes referred to as the first and second line of defense. The first line of defense being the barriers that try and stop the infection from getting in the first place. And then the second line of defense, because if a pathogen does get into your body, the innate immune system is the first thing to respond to it, and those white blood cells and those complement proteins are the first thing to start really fighting that pathogen. The innate immune system does respond faster to infection than the adaptive immune system. So that's why, again, it's the second line of defense. It comes in before the adaptive immune system, which would then be the last line of defense. So let's talk about those barriers first. Again, it's any part of the innate immune system that tries to prevent pathogens from getting into your body in the first place. It includes mechanical, chemical, and microbiological barriers. The mechanical barriers are just physical things like your skin. So if you have like a cut or something, then that is like a weak area in your barrier where infection can get in. But as long as you don't have any like cuts or burns or anything like that, your skin is a really good barrier for infection. It also includes your mucosal membranes, so like in your nose or even in your eyes, your mouth, anywhere that can like trap pathogens and destroy them before they're able to like really take root inside your body. They get like trapped in like your snot. Also things like cilia and nasal hair, all part of the mechanical barriers. Then the chemical barriers include things like acidic secretions. So like in your stomach, for example, the acid in your stomach can kill off not all, but a lot of like possible pathogens that you could eat. The vagina is also acidic in order to prevent pathogens from coming in that way. And then you also have enzymes in like your tears and in your saliva that can kill off pathogens that come in through your eyes or mouth. And then lastly, the microbiological barrier. This is essentially the normal good microbes that you have all over the outside and inside of your body. And it's good to have these good microbes because not only do they sometimes do actual functions for our body, but they also outcompete invading microbes. So the healthier your normal like microbiological community is, the less likely you are to have an invasive pathogen come in and infect you. The next part of the innate immune system is the non-specific cellular responses, which is the second line of defense. So if something gets past one of those barriers, now we're going to have different cells of the immune system start responding. And one of those cells is the neutrophils. Neutrophils, monocytes, basophils, all part of the non-specific cellular responses. So neutrophils are actually attracted to a chemical signal given off by cells that have been damaged by pathogens. The neutrophils are normally like floating through your bloodstream, and your capillaries are your smallest blood vessels. And the neutrophils will leave the capillaries and move towards the infection. And once they get to a pathogen or a microbe, they actually engulf it like into their body through a process called phagocytosis, which we talked about in Science 10. And then the neutrophil essentially pops its lysosome, its suicide sac, and those digestive enzymes that are inside the lysosome digest the microbe, also digest the neutrophil itself, and then that dead neutrophil and digested microbe form pus. Monocytes, also one of these cells of the nonspecific cellular responses. So monocytes also leave the bloodstream into the tissues anytime you have a pathogen coming in through your skin. Once the monocytes leave the bloodstream and go into your tissue, they develop into macrophages. Macrophages have little like arm-like appendages called pseudopods that they grab on to the microbe with, and then just like the neutrophil, they engulf it, they eat it. Once the microbe is inside of the macrophage macrophage will digest the microbe. However, unlike the neutrophil, the macrophage does not digest itself, so it can go around and grab another microbe. So this is kind of what that would look like. So you've got your macrophage. It's going to reach out with a little pseudopod, grab onto the virus, bring it inside of itself so it engulfs it, and then it's going to use the lysosome enzymes to digest the microbe, and then it just spits it out again. The natural killer cells are the only lymphocyte that is part of the non-specific cellular responses. All of the other lymphocytes, the T cells and B cells and stuff, are part of the adaptive immune system. So this is the only one that's part of the innate immune system. And essentially, anytime you have a cancerous cell or a cell that has been infected by a virus, the natural killer cells are going to go and try and kill that infected or that cancerous cell. So essentially, the natural killer cell recognizes that a cell is growing out of control or that it's been infected, and it's going to go up and essentially like stab into the infected cell or the cancerous cell and inject it with digestive enzymes. So I kind of picture like an assassin going up with like a syringe full of like some poison and like stabbing it into the infected cell. And yeah, so it essentially stabs and injects digestive enzymes into the infected or cancerous cell, and then that cell digests itself. It is digested then. Okay, we also have the inflammatory response, which is, if you remember from the last lesson, controlled by our basophils. So one of our granulocytes. So what happens is anytime tissue cells are injured, whether it's because of a pathogen coming in or even just a physical injury, that's going to trigger the inflammatory response. And you can tell that you're having an inflammatory response if in a specific area you have swelling, it's hot, it's red, and it's painful. And that happens because you have increased blood flow to that area. So essentially, anytime you have these injured tissue cells, that is going to trigger basophils to move into that area. The basophils release histamine. The histamine causes the capillaries, the blood vessels, to dilate and become leaky. And so all of this blood is flowing to that area. The white blood cells and fluid and stuff starts to leak out of the capillaries into those tissues. And now you want that to happen because if there's an infection there, you want white blood cells to be able to deal with it. But it does mean that you have the swelling and the redness and the pain and the heat and all of that just because you have these leaking capillaries and all of this fluid going into that area. So this is kind of how it works. So the injured cells are going to send out a signal. The basophils, which are a type of white blood cell, go to that area. The basophils release the histamine. That causes the capillaries to expand. As you can see, they're wider here than here. So they're expanding and they're becoming leaky. So you have more white blood cells going to that area. And then those white blood cells can digest whatever microbe has potentially gotten in there, whether it's like the macrophages or the neutrophils or whatever. A fever is also a non-specific cellular response. This is essentially it's a systemic response, so it affects your whole body at once as opposed to inflammation, which is usually more localized. So when you have infections that spread from the tissues to multiple systems, when it becomes more systematic, like what you have with a cold or flu, then all of those neutrophils and macrophages are going to spread out throughout the entire body, and those white blood cells essentially release a chemical that is going to go through your brain, through your blood to your brain, specifically the hypothalamus, and it's going to tell the hypothalamus to crank up the body's internal temperature. So your hypothalamus essentially sets the internal temperature of your body higher. Your body metabolizes more in order to now reach that higher internal temperature. And it does that because a lot of pathogens don't survive well at high temperature. So it makes it easier for your white blood cells to kill off the pathogens when your body is at a higher temperature. A fever of about 40 degrees Celsius is really helpful in the body fighting infection. And if you take like medication to reduce your fever, it can actually prolong your infection. However, if your fever gets above 40 degrees Celsius, it can start to become dangerous because proteins can start denaturing, and yeah, not good. Then we also have complement proteins. They're also part of the innate immune system. They're part of the blood plasma. The first thing that complement proteins do is identify a pathogen as being non-self. And then there's 3 different methods that these complement proteins can use. One is to just like latch on and surround the microbe so that it can't move anywhere, and it essentially just holds on to that microbe until like a macrophage or a neutrophil can come and eat it. Other complement proteins can actually go up and stab the membrane of the microbe, and then water rushes in and just bursts it. And then the last type of complement protein just kind of like latches on to the outside of the pathogen and just kind of like flags it down, like, hey guys, over here, there's this thing, you should eat it. And again, the macrophages or the neutrophils will come and eat it. So yeah, these are our 3 different options. So either completely surround the microbe, it inactivates it until something can come and take care of it, or it comes and punctures a hole in the microbe, or it kind of latches onto the outside and just like waves over, you know, a neutrophil or a macrophage to eat the microbe. So that was all part of the innate immune system. So kind of as soon as you get an infection in your body, these are the things that are going to start happening, but the response is non-specific. So no matter what that pathogen is, it's always going to be the same response. Macrophages and neutrophils are going to react the exact same way regardless of the type of pathogen. Your basophils with their inflammation, your fever, all of that is not going to change based on what the infection is. The adaptive immune system is a specific response to pathogen. So each pathogen will get its own unique response. The adaptive immune system is slower to respond to infection than the innate immune system. However, once they have identified that pathogen and planned their attack, which is what takes so long, their response is way more effective than the innate immune system. So it takes longer to get going, but it works a lot better once it is going. This response also improves the longer the infection lasts. So your adaptive immune system gets stronger and stronger and stronger the longer your infection is. And if you have an infection of a pathogen and you recover from it, and then that same pathogen comes back and infects you again, your adaptive immune system will be able to respond even stronger and even faster than before. So the first time you get sick with something, it's usually a little rough, but the next time you get sick after that, it becomes easier and easier for your body to fight it. Your adaptive immune system includes antibodies that you get from your mother during breastfeeding, as well as antibodies produced following vaccinations or produced in a prior infection. And the main part of the adaptive immune system is our lymphocytes. Essentially, your lymphocytes are a type of white blood cell, and all of the lymphocytes, except for the natural killer cells, are part of the adaptive immune system. And again, what makes these so great at fighting infection is because they can identify specific pathogens and come up with what are the weaknesses of that specific pathogen. So it's a lot more effective in fighting it. Antigens are foreign molecules that trigger an immune response. So they might be just a part of a pathogen or a non-living molecule. But the white blood cells are really good at identifying these antigens. Again, the first thing that this part of your immune system should do is self, non-self recognition. So is this a part of my body, or is it something harmful that has invaded my body? And then once this part of your immune system has identified something as non-self, then it needs to figure out what specific pathogen is it dealing with based on the antigens that are on its surface, the little molecules on the surface of the microbe, which is the pathogen. The response of these lymphocytes is very diverse because it is responding to every single different pathogen with a different strategy. This includes your B cells and your T cells. So B cells are going to multiply. They produce antibodies, which fight off specific antigens. You have your helper T cells, which identify the antigens, use that to identify the pathogens, and then activate the B cells and the killer T cells. So essentially, the helper T cell figures out what the pathogen is, and then it says to the B cell, this is the antibody you need to make, go do that. And it says to the killer T cell, these are the things you need to kill, here's how, go do it. The killer Ts then go up and stab the pathogens and stab any infected cells and kill them. So similar to how the complement protein works, not like the natural killer cells. The natural killer cells, if you remember, inject the digestive enzymes. Killer Ts don't, they just stab. We also have the suppressor T cells, which slow down the immune response once you've gotten rid of the pathogen. So essentially, like, once the pathogen is taken care of, the suppressor T comes in and is like, okay guys, chill, 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 back to normal. All the T cells are made in the bone marrow and then stored in the thymus until they're mature and ready to use. That is where the name T cell comes from, is thymus. The B cells are just from the bone marrow, hence the B for bone marrow. You also have memory cells, which are essentially lymphocytes, B and T cells, that float around in your blood, and they remember the antigen, they remember the antibody that you use to fight it, and all of the other things you use to fight it. And so if that pathogen infects you again, those memory cells remember exactly who that pathogen is, how to fight it off best, and it can respond to that secondary infection much, much faster, much, much stronger. So yeah, T cells, when a pathogen enters the body, first the macrophages are going to engulf and digest them, because macrophages are part of the second line of defense. T cells are part of the last line of defense, which is the third. But the antigen that's on the outside of that microbe, that pathogen, isn't destroyed. Instead, the macrophage holds on to that antigen and goes and presents it to the helper T cell. And the helper T cell is like, okay, this is what we're dealing with. It tells the B cell the exact shape of the antibody that it needs to make in order to bind to the antigen. And then the helper T cell also causes more B cells to be produced. It causes them to like reproduce. The helper T cell activates the killer T cell. The killer T cell goes and stabs the membranes of the pathogen. Can also stab infected cells, and can kill cancerous cells too. So yeah, this is kind of how that works. So this is our macrophage. It's eating the angry little virus or whatever this pathogen is. And the little red thing is the antigen on the outside of the green pathogen. And so this macrophage, it's going to eat the pathogen. It digests the pathogen, but it holds on to the antigen, which is the little thing on the outside. And then it shows that antigen to the helper T cell, and then the helper T cell goes and tells the killer T cell and the B cells what to do about it. The B cells then produce the antibodies. Each B cell produces only one type of antibodies, which are always Y-shaped. And the tail of the antibody is the constant region. They're like always the same, but the little arm parts of that Y-shaped antibody are the variable regions. They're going to be different for every single antigen that they come across. Again, it's a specific response. The antibodies then bind to the antigens on the surface of the pathogen, which essentially stops that pathogen from being able to work anymore. And then the B cell will also, well, the antibodies also like signal over other white blood cells to kill that pathogen. And so this is what it would look like. So you would have this whole red thing is your pathogen. The little like square and like pointy parts that are sticking off the outside are the antigens. And then this antibody is this green thing, and the little end of the antibody would fit onto the antigen. So the antibody comes from the B cell. It's going to latch on to the outside of the antigen on the outside of the pathogen, which essentially deactivates that pathogen until something comes along and kills it. Okay, so when you are first infected by a pathogen, your innate immune system kicks in right away. The adaptive immune system has to respond more slowly because it has to first identify the pathogen, then come up with the right antibody, and then produce all the antibodies. However, if you get infected by that pathogen a second or a third or whatever time, the response of the adaptive immune system happens much, much more quickly, much, much more strong because of the memory cells remembering what antibodies we have to make, for instance. So the second infection tends to be much, much more mild, much, much less dangerous. And a lot of the times you might not even get sick and you would have no idea that you had even got infected because your adaptive immune system just took care of it before you had any symptoms. This is why vaccines are so important. Vaccines often contain antigens, dead pathogens, or deactivated pathogens. And when you expose your body to this vaccine, the vaccine itself is going to cause either no illness or sometimes a very mild immune response. However, it's going to be a lot safer than if you had just been exposed to like the actual pathogen, not just a dead pathogen or the antigen. But the reason we do this is because your adaptive immune system can learn all about this pathogen and all about its antigens from the vaccine. And so if you do ever after that get infected with the actual pathogen, your adaptive immune system is able to respond right away, very strongly. And so you'll get much less sick or not sick at all because your adaptive immune system had already learned how to kill off this pathogen from the vaccine. The vaccine essentially acts like a trial run. It's like how, you know, pilots practice in like virtual airplanes before they go and fly a real plane, or, you know, anything like that, that you would do a practice run of before you actually get put in that scenario. The vaccine is the trial run, learn how to do all of this stuff, and then when the real deal comes along, you can take care of it without getting horribly or deadly sick. Okay, I am going to draw out another flow chart of this because that was a lot of information. Okay, so I realize you're going to have a hard time actually reading this until I zoom in on that, and even then maybe because my writing is terrible. But so I've separated the immune system into the innate responses and the adaptive responses. So in the innate responses, let me go in a little bit here. In the innate responses, we have our barriers, which include the chemical barriers, like acidic environments, the mechanical barriers, like your skin and your mucosal membranes, and the microbiological, which is like your own healthy bacteria outcompeting the invasive bacteria. Then we have our complement proteins, which can either surround the microbe, stab and burst the microbe, or just attach to the microbe and then flag over one of our other cells of the immune system. Speaking of the cells of the immune system, neutrophils can engulf and digest microbes. They then also die and turn into pus. The basophils release histamine at the site of an injury that causes leaky capillaries and inflammation. And you should know all the signs of inflammation and how it works and everything like that. The monocytes are the ones that turn into macrophages. They're going to engulf and digest the microbe. They do not die. They instead show the antigen to the helper T. A fever is a chemical signal that is sent to the hypothalamus, which increases your body temperature. And then your natural killer cells stab and then inject digestive enzymes into either the infected cell or the cancerous cell. And then we go over to our adaptive or specific immune responses, which is all the B and T cells. So the B cells are going to be the ones that make the antibodies. The helper T identifies the pathogen. It tells the B cell what antibody to make, and it activates the killer T. It also activates the B cell. The killer T just goes around stabbing infected cells or pathogens. The memory cells remember the antigen and the response to it, and then the suppressor T cells slow down the immune response after the infection is gone. So yeah, these guys here, they are like part of your like granulocytes. Oops, spelled that wrong, granulocytes. The monocytes, the natural killers, and all of these B and T cells are part of the agranulocytes, though all of these guys, the natural killers plus the B and T cells, are your lymphocytes. So the natural killers are the only lymphocyte that is not part of the adaptive immune system. Okay, but this guy and the lymphocytes are all agranulocytes. And you should know that macrophages are sometimes also referred to, or sorry, monocytes also referred to as macrophages once they actually leave the bloodstream. Okay, so this is by no means everything that you need to know just on this flowchart here, but it is a good kind of like starting point, but you should be going more in depth with just the stuff I've written in there. Okay, please let me know if you have any other questions.